Marty, thank you for that label as a philosopher. I appreciate it. And just briefly, your story about university property. When I was 16, I went to college at SUNY at Stony Brook, and we had a budget, a $500,000 budget for student activities. And I got up in front of it, and I was the representative to the student government. I got up in front of the board and said, guys, why don't we just buy the land? We can buy a whole bunch of land for peanuts in Rocky Point and other places around Stony Brook. And they said to me, yeah, but the beneficiaries will be the students that come in 20 years later. I said, okay, let's put it on concerts. Okay, so a little bit of background. I've been coming to Marty's events for the last 12 to 15 years. Those of you who don't know me, my name's Eric Singer. I'm a registered broker-dealer with a firm called Bradley Woods. It's been around since 1970. I'm a little bit proud to say that I've been in the business of doing small deals for the last 44 years, and I haven't had a single complaint, which I think I'm luckier than most. Before I go into my deals, I tend to put my own money in the deals that I invest in. So the deals I'm going to be talking to you about, I'm a shareholder. I'm also the banker to these deals. So I had, on occasion, I really try to stick with my deals because I have a vested interest in them that goes beyond a normal banking relationship. So as I talk about the biotech company, I will occasionally participate in bridges for them. So I have conflicts galore, and I just wanted to be aware of that before I launch into what I'm going to launch into. The first company I'm going to talk to you about is a company that I've talked to many of you about in the past. It's called Neotex. Neotex started as an idea on the back of an envelope with three very significant people. One of them was Marcel Rosenzweig, who was the former head of oncology at Bristol Myers. Roger Kornberg, who's a Nobel Prize winner and a scientist that brought it together, a guy named Asher Nathan. They're all three top scientists. The idea was, let's go out and find a company find a drug that's been mistested and can be used for oncology in connection with immunotherapy. We found a great drug out of Sweden, and the drug was called natumomab mesdopetam. The developer had spent $230 million developing it, and they had mistested it. They didn't understand. They mistested it during the mid-2000s. They didn't understand immunotherapy. Nobody knew about immunotherapy when they were testing it. And the way that it was mistested was they were looking for very fast tumor shrinkage. And in fact, with immunotherapy, unlike chemo, you don't necessarily get immediate tumor shrinkage. You get it 90 days, 120 days later, the tumors get larger and they burst and die. So we were able to acquire that drug for 12 cents. And the drug had a problem, okay, and it was a problem that completely stopped us cold from getting any venture support, which was the way our drug works. We fool the body into thinking that it has a bacterial infection. So you get an enormous immune response because of that. But part of the immune response that we got, that the drug got, was that it also stimulated anti-drug antibodies to effectively flush the drug out of the system before it could do anything. The prior developer had not figured out how to deal with that. We did. We did a safety experiment where a safety trial, phase 1 trial, where we demonstrated that in the hands of the prior developer, they could only basically dose patients once. We showed that we could dose patients over a 3-month period 6 times, and with a highly efficacious drug. So we fixed that mistake, and then we made a couple of our own. We did a trial because we had been approved for dose and had safety in combination with chemo. When we had a big raise in 2019, we did a chemo trial that was ill-advised. We didn't understand how out of favor chemo was, so we thought we would have good results, which we did. We had 65% disease control, which is a pretty good number in oncology, 20% response rate. But in the world, there are virtually no VCs in the world that want to go to a cocktail party and say, oh yes, I made further investment in chemo. We would have had to have like a 90% disease control rate to get that to happen. So we misfired. We did a bad merger. The CEO hired a lot of people, and we got overextended. As we mentioned yesterday in the program, it's been a very tough couple of years for biotech. It was easy to raise money when the competition was zero interest rates. It's not easy to raise money going into 2022 and 2023. There were 700 biotech companies that, as Norm likes to tell me, that raised more than $10 million that went bankrupt in the last 2 years. So it is very, very tough environment. We recently, on the strength of a recommendation from one of the top pancreatic oncologists in the world, we just closed on getting an additional $10 million into the company last week. And I had raised money at valuations ranging from 17 million up to 100 million. And the new investor said, well, I'll ride to the rescue, but I'm going to do it with a very severe down round. All the existing shareholders are committed to go side by side with me and with the investment. And Eric, if you have a few others, I'll accept some of the others from you. So the new investors coming in at a $5 million pre-money valuation. I anticipate five. So that's what.
But the company is saved.
The company is saved. The company is saved.
700.
Yeah. So the company is saved, and I had arranged a bridge loan of $500,000, which kept the company alive. So my investors, I was a little bit fearful of going back to my investors, calling them up and saying, that stock that you bought at 17, it's now worth 62 cents a share, but it's saved and we have another chance to make a go of it. And half of them were like, Eric did a good job, he stuck with it, most of the other bankers disappeared. But I just want my tax loss. Okay, half of them are in that camp, and half of them are in the camp of, I can go side by side and re-up on something that I thought was worth 100 or I thought was worth 50, and now you still have the same upside. In fact, I think we have a bigger upside. We're planning an esophageal trial in India. Our chief medical officer was the former head of clinical oncology at Bayer AG. This is a guy that was making $1 million or $2 million before he came to work for us. One of his hallmarks is wherever he's gone, he's left a trail of billions of dollars of drug approvals. And he developed expertise in India, so we have a crackerjack team in India ready to take on the project. And we have an Indian investor that has conducted over 60 oncology trials in India and is interested in putting his own money in at a significantly higher value than the 62 cents a share. That trial is an esophageal trial. The data on esophageal is it's a bright line of 19% response rate with checkpoint inhibitor. Our partner AstraZeneca is providing us with free checkpoint drug. And in India, checkpoint sales worldwide are probably roughly $40 billion, with Merck as the leader. But in India, they can't afford checkpoint. So in the US, we probably have 200,000 patients that have gotten checkpoint. In India, it's 500. So we're going to be able to attract patients that are checkpoint naive, and we think we have an enormous chance to succeed. In addition, none of this is official. This is just a verbal chat that I've had, but there is a pancreatic foundation, that's a significant foundation that was instrumental in getting our new investor to come. The scientist who's head of their scientific advisory board had a discussion with the new investor and pointed to an experiment that we did with mice called the KRAS mutant experiment, which mimics pancreatic cancer in its results. And she said it's one of the finest sets of results I've ever seen in mice. And we did do a phase 1 trial where we treated patients across all indications, and it was a small trial, but one of the patients in the trial was a pancreatic stage 4 patient, and that patient, we completely cleared them of tumor. It's 4 years later, there's been no return of tumor. That's a very unusual result for pancreatic. On a personal basis, I believe that if we have success in the esophageal trial, you can make a case that the company is worth $500 million. Post all the refinancing, there's going to be about 30 million shares outstanding. So the upside there, and I'm Forcewell put some odds on it, but the upside there is maybe 10, 15 bucks a share. If we succeed in the pancreatic trial, the upside is $1 to $10 billion, that could be $100 a share. So I'm in the business of selling asymmetric options. I addressed this audience a few times on a periodontal deal that I did recently. That deal, my clients in discussion with a strategic. If I had to mark that to market, I think my investors have probably made 4 to 5 on paper, probably have a plausible chance of having 4 to 5 times their money on a mark in 2025. So very briefly to sum up on Neotex, it's a restart. We've changed out the CEO. We've brought in a VC, a guy with experience on 17 turnarounds to run the company. He has about a half a dozen to a dozen biotech turnarounds, and the science is first rate, the drug is first rate. In the words of the pancreatic oncologist, it absolutely deserves a trial. If we have 1 or 2 successful trials, it's going to be just great. In addition, I want to talk to you just briefly about my other deal, which is not a biotech deal. Gudrun last night said, could you just please tell me about how I can buy Bitcoin back at 10 cents a share? So I wanted to be responsive to Gudrun.
I said 300.
You wanted to buy it at 300?
Yeah, I wasn't that greedy.
Okay, so I can deliver. In that spirit, I'm working with a company called Can't AI. I do these small pesky deals, okay? So I've raised $500,000 to put Can't AI into business. And Can't AI is run by a very smart guy who spent some time as a programmer, then went off to Hollywood, did movies. And he was making a movie in Dominican Republic that he wanted to have as a monster movie. He worked with an illustrator for 2 months trying to get the exact kind of monster that he wanted. And finally, he threw up his hands and he used AI to get the face, okay? So he got the face of the monster that he wanted. And then he went to his technical people and he said, well, can we manipulate this face so that it's consistent and people look at it and make sense? And they just said, no, the math is too complicated. So let me explain what's too complicated about it and what we make so simple, okay? So maybe Norm and I are the only ones in this room that remember when movies were first made back in 1870. So if you made a movie back in
Silent.
well, they were relatively silent. So just to remind you, Norm, the first time we saw movies. So you'd have a picture of somebody. They take a photograph of a person with his hand here and his hand here and his hand here, and if you do that, they do, and eventually the early filmmakers in Hollywood settled on 24 frames a second. So a frame is a celluloid, it's a photo, okay? And 24 frames a second is enough to convey motion and so on and so forth. So 24 frames a second became the standard. And when films changed from celluloid to video copied that format of 24 frames a second or 60 frames a second in the case of sports or 100 frames a second in the case of boxing. And a frame, depending upon the standard you're using, a frame has 8 million pixels. There are 3 colors for each pixel. It's 24 million pieces of data, 500 to 600 million pieces of data per second, okay? And my client asked his technical guys, well, there's so much data burden on this. Why we when I move my hand from here to here to here, nothing changes on this part of the picture. Okay, you have this data burden that you don't need to have. So he came up with the idea of let's just manipulate the pixels. Okay, if the pixels change, we'll report that. If the pixels change, we don't have to spend data burden on managing the pixels that don't change. What I love about it, and why I think there's a legitimacy to my point to Gudrun is we can save billions and billions and billions of gigabytes. Now, who cares about that? Well, the answer is all the consumers care about it. Netflix, based on public documents in 2022, Netflix, outside of their own resources, was spending $900 million a year on streaming, okay? And they're being charged 2 cents per gigabyte, okay? We think order of magnitude that we can save Netflix or similar client 1 cent out of those 2 cents, okay? So
So it's like a 50% compression rate?
50%. I'm gonna be a little bit vague about it because with the money I raise, we're gonna get more exact answers on it. So I don't know whether it's gonna be 30% compression on the raw data, 40%, but it's gonna be quite substantial. And
You've raised $500,000.
I've raised $500,000 at a $10 million valuation.
How much are you raising?
We would like to raise, my client's a little reluctant to part with the equity. The battleground, we're probably gonna raise about $2 million in total. He thinks he might be able to pull this off with as little as $1 million. So
Where are they based?
company's based in California. And the company's identified their first client who's comparable to Netflix in terms of how much they're spending on streaming. That company, we've had several conversations with them. The first conversation was, well, gee, we have 160 million subscribers. We would like to, you know, when you have a minimum viable product for 160 million, we'd like to move ahead. And they thought about it and they came back and said, you know, we've spent millions of dollars with other compressors. Why don't you see if you can just give us a working model that shows that you have data sparsity, and we can present it to the board, we'll go ahead with you. Then they came back and said, well, if you can do that, we'll start to give you revenue. Then they came back and said, well, you know, once you do that, we would like to be able to invest in you. Okay, this is a $6 billion company. They're not going to get to invest at a $10 million valuation. So if we're successful in getting this going, I think the very first step up could be 50 to 100 million valuation. We have our kickoff meeting with them on December 9th to go through the engineering specs. We've got our engineering team in place. And you know, the reason why I think it could be it's a potential Bitcoin at $300 a coin is that there are I'm aware of $150 billion being spent on streaming. If we can save $10 billion and charge 10% of the savings, we can have a top line of $1 billion. Be quite a successful deal. So just to recap, my name is Eric Singer. I'm E. Singer at Bradley Woods. I'm happy to disclose more under soft NDA and by email. Please. I'm open to any inquiry on people who want to invest. And
What's your valuation for this round?
the valuation for this round is 10 million pre-money.
10 million.
10 million pre. And one other thing that just on the technology side, the counsel to the company is Kilpatrick Townsend. The particular lawyer that's doing it was Adobe's patent counsel for in-house patent counsel. So now they funnel all their work in at Kilpatrick. Guy's been in the business for 25 years, hasn't seen anything like this. Prior art search shows nothing like this. The ability to do this before we got to the level of computing power that we have now was not available. So, and our patents have been, we have filed for patent protections, but we have not pushed to have the patents issued. So it's a much sounder deal than the usual deal. And the people that came into it are people that did serious due diligence, got independent engineers, came back and said, this is a go.
Fantastic.
So, guys, Eric Singer at Bradley Woods.
Great job.
212-203-5134. I'm gonna have one final